Afternoon, everyone. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We'll just wait for some more people to join us. If you've just joined, let me know who you are so I can say hello. I'm just busy looking for this on my phone so I can see you, so I can see what you can see. There we are. 4 people online. Joy is watching. Hello, Joy. 5. Excellent. Hey, Joy. Are you good? I'm here, under the camera. I'll just wait a little while longer 'cause we're just about on 2 o'clock. I know it takes a little while before the feed becomes live. So, hi, Karen. Hello, I like the smiley face. Hello, Donna. Good to have you along too. Hope you're well, Donna. Okay, we're up to 9. So I'll just do a bit of preamble whilst we wait for others to join. Just so you are aware, hello Linda. 11 of you watching now. So I thought I'd go back to basics this week and do a whole week of watercolour. Hello Gay, good to see you. A whole week on watercolour and go right back to basics because some of you may have struggled with the challenges. So by the end of today, we're going to create this little landscape scene, just a beach, some trees, some hills and a graduated sky. So that's our aim, to complete that by the end of today. You can either paint along. If you find that too stressful, you can re-watch it later. And as soon as I can, hello Christine. As soon as I can, I will also post it onto my YouTube channel. It's much easier, I find, for people to find them on the YouTube channel. Wow, 17 of you watching, 18. Okay. So this is our aim today, to give you the techniques you need to create this little scene. So I'll just pop that out of the way. I'm going to get through several pieces of watercolour paper today. But we'll start with the tools. So I'm using a little pan pastel today, and I've already started my little palette, put some water in the cells and chose some colours. Hello Moira, how are you, my lovely? So yeah, I've got that ready while I was waiting for you guys to join. Brushes, let me talk to you about brushes. You struggled with the sweet peas? By the end of the week, you'll be able to go back to the sweet peas. And hello, Lauren. Good to have you along as well. I hope you're all well out there in virtual land. So just a bit about the brushes I'm going to be using today. I've brought out one of my big boys. So it's a large flat brush. It's a beautiful brush, Aquafine One Stroke it's called, by Dela Roney. Really soft. These big brushes are good for doing large areas, large skies, that kind of thing. So I've got that. Doesn't matter if you haven't got one of those. It really doesn't matter. You can, and in my classes, we normally use these two. So we've got a large number 10 round and a smaller, probably a number 5 round. Okay. And most of the things I do, I use this brush. This is my one brush that I go back to time and time again. And what you're looking for with a brush is that when it's wet, it comes to a nice point so that you can do small marks as well as large. Okay, so that's the brushes. I've also got another palette ready for mixing some colours in, which I'll show you in a little while. So let's move that out the way and we'll make a start. And the first thing we're going to learn to do today is a flat wash. I'm just going to go over to my bigger sheet of paper. I'll do it for you using the round brush. So I'll show you what we're going to do. So we're going to create a flat, even colour using one brush and some paint. Now, when you're doing a wash, it's best to mix up some paint ready. So if you're using a tube, just pour a bit of the tube paint and water it down, add water. To affect the colour and strength of watercolour, it all depends how much water you're using in your mix. I'm just going to add a bit more colour to this. To my puddle, I call them puddles. So I'm going to start with the blue because skies, quite often when you're doing a wash, it'll be a sky or it'll be the sand. Okay, now you should have your board at a slight angle. So I'm just going to hold it with my hand and tip it up, just a slight angle. It will help with the paint flowing down the paper. And we are just going to go wet paint onto dry. So in my puddle, I'm just loading up my brush with lots of luscious paint. And I'm just going to come from left to right. And then I'm going to stop. When you stop, you should see a puddle of paint forming. So go back into that puddle and stop. You'll see the puddle, pick it up and come across again. Okay, I'm reloading my brush with a bit more paint. So back into that puddle, always going back into where you stopped. Stop, there's a puddle. Can you see that puddle there? Pick that puddle up and come back across. And across. Pick the puddle up and come across. Okay, when you get to the end, if that was the end of your sky, you would just clean your brush off, nice and damp, and then if there was a puddle left there, just drag your brush along to soak up any paint that was remaining. And you get a lovely, smooth, even application of the paint. I'll do it again for you. So load up your brush, lots of paint. Make sure if you're doing a sky, you've got enough paint to do the whole sky. Across, there's a puddle. Back into the puddle, across. A puddle, back into, so you're going back into the bottom. And if you've got your paper on a slight tilt, the paint will carry on pulling. Gravity will do its job. And you just keep going back into the bottom, picking up that last bit of paint and back across again. There we go. Now everyone can do that. Hello, Margaret. Long time no see. Good to have you along. So we're just doing a flat wash. Okay. Easy, isn't it? Now, when you're doing skies, pay attention. When you look up at the sky, you'll find that your sky is darker towards the top and lighter as it comes down towards the horizon line. So what I'm going to show you next is doing a graduated wash. Okay, now there's a couple of ways you can do a graduated wash. The first way I'll show you is very similar to what we've just done. So I'm just going to load up my brush with this lovely blue again. And I'm going to come across a couple of bands. One side, then the other. Whatever you do, don't stop your brush halfway along a page when you're working. Otherwise you will get a horrible brush mark. Okay, so I've done that top band. Now I'm washing my brush off and just loading it with clean water. And I'm taking the clean water back into that puddle where I left off and coming backwards and forwards just with clean water. And all that's left on the brush, just carry on with that brush. There's less and less paint as you come down and you'll get this really lovely graduated wash. Oops. Okay, guys, can you see that? Going from dark to light. Hello, Agnes. Good to have you along. I'll do that one once more. It's good for you to see it a couple of times because you might be painting along. So again, load up my brush with the blue paint. Blue and water, remember. I've got a puddle of it here. Go across and across. Make your band at the top. Wash your brush off. Clean water only on the brush. Go back where you stopped and carry on going. Just dragging the colour, what's left on your brush, down the page. You can go back in if you want to and drag a bit more down. And you'll get this lovely light to dark effect. So that's your sky. Hello, Hilary. Good to have you along, Hilary. We've just been doing some flat washes and just done a graduated wash. So if you missed it, you'll be able to watch again. Now, what you can also do in that sky, let's say you wanted some fluffy clouds, whilst your paint's still wet, clean your brush off and just have it damp and twiddle it, just twiddle it in that paint. And your brush will act like a sponge and it will lift out your fluffy clouds. This might be too dry. I'll try over here. Yeah, that's already started to dry back. So if it started to dry back, you may need to just put a bit more pressure on your brush. Keep twiddling it. So all I'm doing is giving it a twiddle, a little twiddle. Of course, you can also use other things to lift out. You can use a tissue. So if you wanted it brighter, just screw up a little bit of tissue and go back over. And there you go. Fluffy clouds in your sky. Anything that's absorbent you can use to lift out the paint, guys. Okay, so mainly I use the brush itself or tissue. You could use a natural sponge or any kind of sponge, or a cotton bud. You could use a cotton bud. That would work too. Okay, so that's our flat area and that's our graduated sky. Okay, now let's talk about, so this is wet on dry, wet paint on dry paper. So the other way to do a graduated wash is to wet your paper first. So just wet the area of the sky. You don't want it soaking. If you hold your paper up to the light, you'll be able to see how much water you've put on. I've got too much, so I'm just going to wipe off any excess. You just want your paper damp. And this is another way to do the graduated wash. Just like we did before, go in with your band of colour across the top. Wipe off your brush. Excuse me, I am a bit croaky today. Clean water. Go back in and do the same thing. Pull it down through the water. It gives you a much softer look than the first time. I'm just going to go over that again because it's a bit light. So dark at the top. Wipe off the brush. Wipe off the brush, clean water. Come back into the paint, side to side, bring it down the page, and you have your graduated wash. Okay, it's a bit different to this one because you've got more puddles going on and the paint will be a bit more free and loose. And you can also tip it. Watch it, can you see? I'm tipping that and it's all running down. It's like a rain cloud. Can you see that? Because I'm really holding that page up and the paint's following the water. There we go. So now you can go away and do a sky. No problem. Cool. Let me talk to you about wet in wet then. That was a wet in wet technique. Wet paper, wet paint. But we can have more fun with wet and wet than that. So I'm just going to go back up to the top of my page and put clean water down again. You can't see this bit. Oh dear, it makes for an interesting video. Putting clean water on paper. What fun. I'm just checking that my paper's not too wet. You want it to be shiny, but not soaking and puddly. Okay, so now I've got my wet paper. I'm going to put some paint directly into it. I'm just going to load up my brush and drop, just with the tip of the brush, into that water. I'm going to hold this up because I want you to see what happens. Dropping that paint in. Watch it spread out. The paint loves the water. It's just going to spread and play. I'm going to drop some pink in here as well. It's like a little mini firework. Oh, that's a big blob. Just so you can see the effect of the paint flowing in the water. Yeah? That is the wet in wet technique. I'm going to put some more blue in. Bigger lumps of blue. Just dropping them in and around. And what's going to happen is that paint's going to mix together and you'll get your third colour happen there and then on the paper. So you might be able to see it's going a bit purpley where the blue and the red are mixing. Over here, can you see the purple effect? I'll drop a bit more in, a bit more blue in, straight into this red. You see that burst out, and then the colours will start to mix. That would make for a great sunset sky. It's a great technique to use for clouds. All sorts, actually. I use wet and wet, as you may have seen from my other videos, a lot. Okay, I'm going to show you another effect. I really want you to get used to the paper and how wet it is. Now, if I'd left that paper and for the water to start to sink in, your effect would be lessened. So as the paper dries out, you will get less of a starburst, okay? It will move less because there's not enough water for the paint to flow in. So I'm going to do another flat wash. This time I'm going to do it in yellow. Just clean my brush out. I've got a really vibrant yellow mix up for you here. So I'm just going to flat wash. So remember, take your brush across, stop, pick up the puddle, come back again. Pick up the puddle, come back. Each time going into that puddle, and you'll get a flat, even colour. I'm going to do this twice because I want one of these flat washes to dry out. Sorry guys, it's Facebook trying to call me. I had a call scheduled with them this morning and they were late. So I was busy getting ready for this. So they will have to wait. Okay, so I've got my 2 flat washes of yellow. Excuse me a second because I'm just going to hit the hairdryer. I want that to dry back just a little. I'm just going to give it a blast with the hairdryer. I want the top one to stay wet and the bottom one to be dry. I'll let that carry on drying. Okay, now the top one's still wet. I'm going to do this wet and wet again. I'm going to take orange and I'm going to bring just the tip of my brush across that wash. I'm going to go straight from the pan, make it stronger, let you really see what's happening here. Take that strong colour across. Let me just soak that up. Let me hold it up to the camera again. So what you'll see happening in the edges of the wash, it's blurring. The orange is mixing with the yellow and you're getting this really soft combination of colours. The orange is working with the yellow and it's spreading out because that wash is still wet. So if you're doing a distant scene and you've got some hazy mountains, that kind of thing, and you want them to just bleed into your sky, then you would put that down whilst your paper's still damp. You don't want it too wet. If it's too wet, it's going to bleed right up into your sky. But just letting it dry back a bit gives you this blurred out edge. It's a soft edge. Okay, now this, I'm just going to give that one more blast because I want this next bit to be totally dry. Okay, and now I'm painting wet on dry again. So I'm going to take my orange again, same as before, and bring my line across. This time that line's just going to sit there and it will dry with a crisp edge. So if you want something to stand out and to dry with a sharp edge, then it needs to be wet on dry. If your paper's still damp, it will bleed and it will ruin the effect that you're going for. So, you know, the outside, you could have done a beach scene and you've got a bucket on the beach. You want that bucket to stand out. You want the sides to be crisp. Make sure your sand, your background is dry before you apply your next layer of paint. Okay, really simple tips. Look how this orange one, this soft one, has now bled out. So different effects depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve with your painting. Okay, are you following me? Are you with me? Okay, I'm going to show you now some glazing or layering. Watercolour is the most beautiful medium. I think it can't be surpassed by any other. It's unique in that its translucent qualities. It's translucent, it's not opaque, so you can see one colour through another, which allows you to get really cool effects. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to use one of these. This one's quite nice and tidy. Well, the other thing, guys, look at this. Now this is dried, I'm going to hold that really close to the camera. Look at the edges of these washes. Look how crisp and sharp that edge is. Why does that happen? That's where the water hits the dry paper and stops. It can't go any further, and then the paint pigment dries along the edge of the paint. It's looking for somewhere to go, can't go anywhere. So you get this sharp, crisp edge. So all these will dry with a sharp, crisp edge, even this, except for this Wet n Wet one here. This one will always have a soft edge. Why? Because we wet the paper first and the paint is sitting within that wet paper. So the edge is nice and blurred and hazy, as opposed to this sharp one of the one next to it. Okay, I hope this is helping you. Right, so I'm going to go back to this with the same colour I used before. I'm just going to take my brush and load it with the same colour. And I'm going to start doing my wash technique again with this lovely blue. Come into and down, across, whoops, down, across, pick up the puddle. I messed up, guys, there, because, like an idiot, I tapped my brush on the tissue. So I'm going to do that again, across and down, across and down. And I'm going to stop there. Okay, I'm going to get my hairdryer again. Excuse the noise for a moment. I'm going to dry that off. Normally you would just wait for this to dry, paint a different area, go and make a cup of tea. It doesn't take long to dry back. I just want to speed things up for you guys. There we go, that's done it. Okay, now to do this technique, your paint underneath must be dry, okay? If you do it whilst it's still wet, you'll just get this effect. You'll get this effect here. So your paint to do glazing must be dry, all the layers. Once that layer's dry, you can take another layer of the same colour or even a different colour over the top, and that's glazing. You will make your colour deeper, so you could do your whole sky and think, actually, I want it darker. Let your sky dry. It's the best way to do it. Let the sky dry and then repeat what you did previously. And you get a stronger colour. Look how much stronger that layer is. Exactly the same colour over the top. No difference in the amount of water. It's the same puddle that I used before. So I'm going to do it again. Actually, whilst I'm doing that, I'm going to start this one off because I want to show you something else. So I'll just come over the top of this one. And whilst that's drying, let that one dry. Okay, so now I'm going to come back a third time, same colour, just one stripe this time, over the top. Let it dry. So you've got your 3 tones. Can you see that? I don't want to tip my page because it's still wet. You get the 3 strengths of colours from glazing. The technique, you may see it called overlay or glaze. I'm just going to dry this other one off. No, actually, I'll come over here. I'll show you over here on this yellow. So over on this yellow area, I'm going to take, because that's dry now, I'm going to glaze it with blue. Just going to take some blue. Take the blue over the top of the yellow. The yellow is dry. Just prove it here. I'll put the blue next to it because it's like magic. Look what I've got. Look what I've got. I don't have blue anymore. I have green. It's an optical illusion. It's like looking through, you know, those plastic document wallets that you get, or if you get those fun pink sunglasses. Glazing is like that in effect. You're putting one see-through layer over the top of another see-through layer, and you get your colours to mix optically on the paper. So instead of mixing blue and yellow to make green, you can just put your blue over the top of the yellow. The trick is not to have your paint too thick. You want it watered down. If it's too thick, it's just going to struggle to show the colour beneath it, okay? So you're better off doing thin, light glazes, more water than paint, okay, to get the effects that you want. I'm just going to put my arm across here a second. Bear with me, guys, because I can't see the comments because I'm getting all sorts of messages pop up on my screen. No. And I can't see if you're saying anything. I nearly came off the page then. Okay, it's all right. No one said anything, but I just really want to make sure I'm not missing any questions that you're asking. So you get this glazing, yeah? Cool. So before we go on to our beach scene, I just want to talk to you about the strength of colour. So I'm just going to get another sheet of paper here. And this is something you really should practice and certainly do before you undertake one of your paintings. So in my little palette here, let me move that one out of the way, bring my palette in. I'm going to mix a really strong colour. So I like this orange. I'm going to go with this orangey red. I'm just going to, with a wet brush, activate the paint. Really get a lot of paint on there and put it into one of the cells on my palette. I'm going to do it again. So strong. I want it strong, so I don't want too much water. So I'm not putting water in here first. I'm going strong. Okay. I'm just going to paint that swatch down to get my strongest colour. We don't use white in watercolour. White is the enemy. So now for the next shade, I'm going to put some water in my next cell on my mixing palette. And I'm going to pick up some of this colour and drop in there. So it's more diluted and I'll get a lighter colour. So to affect the strength of colour, it's just the dilution that you're working with. I'm going to put a little bit more colour in there. Actually, that was a bit weak. Okay. And then again, to make your next shade, some water in the next palette. I said we're going back to basics, and we really are. And your next shade. Now I've done that quite basic. You could do a whole page of shades, guys, just by adjusting your water slower than I did. You could also work the other way around. So you could start with water, bring the paint to your water puddle, paint your light colour, and then just play with that puddle, add more, another drop of paint to it to go darker. And again, take some more paint, go darker, and one more, darker still. Now, if you use white, what will happen is your beautiful translucent paints go opaque and you end up with flat, boring colours. You lose the translucency and the beauty of watercolour. So that's why I say white is the enemy. If we're going to use white, it's the white from the page. So you have seen how watercolour spreads in the water. I'm going to hold this up now. I'm going to hold it really tight to the camera. Can you see those water, the strength of colour pulling at the bottom of those patches that I've just painted? Look at those puddles in the bottom of that swatch of paint. Look how it's resisting running down the paper. If you had loads of water on there, it would eventually, gravity would win and it would go down the page. But where it hits the dry paper, it just stops. So in your painting, I'm just going to tip that back up. When you're painting and you've got an area of light that you want to keep, white paper, you want that highlight in the glint of an eye, you want where the sun's hitting a vase on the side and you've got that white you want to keep. If you keep your paper dry, the paint will not go on it unless you put it there. Okay? That's my tip. Remember the lifting out that I showed you earlier for the clouds? You can do that on your wet paint. When it's wet, drag your brush through and lift out. So if you wanted to try and recover from a bad situation, you can. People say watercolour is unforgiving. What is happening is because the paper's still damp, every time I drag some paint off and wipe it on my tissue, so drag it, pick up the paint, wipe on your tissue, go back, drag it, wipe off on the tissue, and then you'll end up lightening that area. And you can use this for a technique in something you're painting rather than just fixing a mistake, and take it through. And look how much paint I've taken off of there. So to get a highlight again on an object, you can use the lifting off technique. Okay, remember you can use a tissue for that or a cotton bud as well. And that's how to do it when your paint is still wet. Just beware, don't take your eye off the ball, that the paint will continue. Look, it's filling in as I'm talking. It's going back and infilling where I've taken it out. So you do have to keep repeating that if you want it to stay light. Okay, I'm going to move that to one side and just talk to you about lifting out dry paint. So these are totally dry now, and I decide that I want to lift an area out. You can do that as well. This time you need a wet brush. Just get rid of the excess on your tissue and slowly pull your brush, lay it on the paint. It will reactivate the paint. This painting could be a year old, it could be 100 years old. You can lift the paint out. Just take some doing. Wipe your brush. Now I'm going to bring a bit of tissue over here so you can see what's coming out, because it looks like I've lifted nothing. Watch. Take the brush across, take it across, wipe out. You can see the colour that I'm picking up from the paint. Just give it a little bit more pressure because you're reactivating that paint. There we go. That's what I've lifted out. The area's getting lighter. You will never get your paper back to white. It's impossible. It will always be stained. But again, you can use this for an effect. You can carve out into your paint, even when it's dry, look. In fact, in some ways, you've got more control doing it when it's dry than when it's wet, because it's not going to try and infill behind your brush stroke. There we go. Lifting out. Another technique that you can use in your paintings. Are we good? Is there anything I've missed? No? Okay, so I'm going to put this to one side and then we're going to put those techniques into practice, and I'm going to show you how to create this very simple scene, beach scene and dunes, distant hills. Let me move this board out of the way. Are you with me, guys? This will get more technical as we go through the week. And I said we're back to basics, and we are. I'm just going to have a slurp of tea. Any questions? Ask away. Okay. So I have my paper taped down. When you're doing a painting that you want to keep, rather than just playing around and practicing, tape your paper with some masking tape. I use a very low tack one. It's so low tack that it comes unstuck. So it's not going to tear my paper. But you can use any tape. The trick is, if it's a really sticky one, to tap it down on your clothes, on your jeans, or on the table. just to get rid of that stickiness so that when you take your tape off, it doesn't tear your paper. Just reduce some of that stickiness. Now I have my colours mixed out. I'm just going to switch my palettes back. Okay, and then you stretch your paper. So to stretch your paper, you just take clean water. I'm going for my big brush now. And just give your paper some food. You don't want to saturate it. You just want to give it a shine. Keep going over it, and then you would let that dry back. Or if you're going to do a graduated wash, you could go straight on and paint. I'm just going to give it another quick blast of the hairdryer. Oh, good, Sandy. I'm glad to hear that you're learning. And Karen, thank you. I'm just going to dry this off. Sorry about that, guys. So why do I go through that process? If you start using a lot of water on unstretched paper, what will happen is it will buckle, and you'll end up, when you wet the paper, the fibres in the paper contract, okay? And then you get this hills and mountains, hills and valleys on your paper. And whatever you do, you can iron it if you like. You're not really going to get your paper flat again. You could to the other side of it. Oh, that's a good tip, Sandra. Heat the paper first. I've never known that. Of course, it would obviously heat up the glue and stop it from tearing. What a great tip. Thank you. There we go. It's all about sharing, guys, isn't it? Okay, so because I'm doing quite a large surface here, I'm using the whole A4 sheet. I'm just going to, I think I've got enough blue in. I'm going to do a graduated wash. I'm going to tilt my page. I'm going to take this blue along the top band of my paper, right over the masking paper. Get my strong band. I want it a bit stronger than that. Take another, go across it again. Then I'm going to clean my brush. Remember, clean the brush. Get rid of the excess blue and just fill your brush with water. I'm going to go back over where I ended up. Pick up that paint and work down the page. So I'm getting lovely graduate. It's very light actually. Maybe I should have put more colour on. I'm going to do it again. I'm going into the top. Come down. Wash off the brush. Clean water. Back in. Backwards and forwards across the page. It's nice and light. There we go. So we've got that nice graduated wash. Remember what I said earlier, if you do want it darker than that, you can wait and let it dry and give it another glaze. You could even bring a sunset in, that would be cool, and glaze it with a pink over the top in the lower part of the portion of the sky. So I'm happy with that. What I'm going to do is put some sand in now. So I've got some yellow ochre, which is that mustard yellow. Good colour for the sand. I'm just going to add a bit more into my palette here, so I've got enough to work with. So always mix up enough paint to work with. And I'm going to leave a bit of gap between the sky and where I start my sand. And it's a graduated wash again. Take it across, clean out the brush. Just water, not too much. Back into that colour where you left off and work it down the page. I want this to be really light. Hope you can see it. It's not too light that you can't see it. I'll give it another layer. Normally I would wait for that to dry to do this. I just want to give it another layer so you guys can see better. Let's take that down. There we are. So I've got a stronger sand now that you can see. Now, I want to dry it off again. I really apologise for the use of the hairdryer, guys, but this is important. Remember, if you wanted some fluffy clouds, you could use your tissue and pick some fluffy clouds out. You could go in with your brush or with a tissue and lift out some areas of blue. Okay, now I'll just bring this picture back down. So we've got a row of trees here and a hill range behind it. Okay, now you might think the next thing you should do is put the hill range in, which you could, but you would have to leave out gaps for where your trees are going to sit. Okay, so I'm just going to put my trees in first, and then later I'm going to bring the hill range in. You've seen what happens when we add a layer over another, colour over another one, and glaze. So when we bring our hills in, we're going to make the tree slightly darker because I'm going to let the hill go over the top of my tree line, but it will be just deepening the colour of the trees. Let me pop that back and show you exactly what I mean. So let me grab my little paint palette. So I'm going to pop it here so you can see what I'm doing. So I've got quite a nice green in here. You can mix your green, blue and yellow, mix some lovely green. This one's quite a nice fresh green that comes in the Winsor & Newton set. So I'm just getting a nice puddle. Remember, getting enough ready for you to use. I want it really strong. These trees need to stand out. It's going to be wet on the dry paper. I'm going to bring a little bit. There's a slightly bluey green here. I'm going to bring a bit of that in just to change the colour slightly. A bit more strength, more paint. Just if you're not sure, test it down on a spare bit of paper and see whether you've got the colour that you want. Just bear in mind that watercolour does dry back lighter than when you put it on. And for my tree line, I'm just going to come in with the tip of my brush and push up random patterns of trees, just pushing the tip of the brush up to create this tree line. Load up again. I'm going to come the other side. I'm going to go a bit higher over this side, coming right up into the sky. You can just dab it down. We're not thinking about any particular shapes here. Just a nice soft row of trees. Just tickling it around with the tip of my brush, pushing it up into the sky here and there to break that line up. Another thing you can do with your tree line is to scratch into it to create branches. But before I do that, I'm going to add a darker green. So I'm going to take some blue into my green. Oh, too much. I want a darker green. Much darker. There we go. Bit more blue. Bit more green. There we go. And I'm going to drop this darker green here and there in this line of trees. So it's creating a bit more depth. Wet in wet now. So we put wet over dry for our trees initially. And now I'm working wet in wet. Just dropping this darker hue. I don't want to smother the green that I've put down. Just bring some interest, some shadows amongst this tree line. Need a bit more over here. A bit darker. When that dries, you get a really nice effect. And what you can do is take the end of your brush, or if you have a bamboo stick or just a twig. Let me find my bamboo stick. I can never find it when I want it. Where are you? Okay, I found one here. So you can take a twig or a bamboo stick and just pull up, going through that wet paint and creating some interest, some odd branches. Don't overdo it. Or if you haven't got anything like that, a toothpick or just the end of your brush, just use your brush upside down, go into that wet paint and create some interest in your tree line. You can also use a toothpick or a paper clip. I'm going to try it with my bamboo pen and score into the paper. When you score into the paper, you're making a little groove. Can you see this? I've just scored into that paper, and the paint being wet still, the paint has to be wet, is filling in the grooves and creating the effect of trunks and branches. So I'm just indenting. Don't push too hard. You don't want to tear the paper. Just scratch in, and the paint goes into that little furrow that you've made, and it becomes darker, more saturated colour in those grooves. How cool is that? Easy. Okay, now I need to let my tree line dry. You could put, if it was a brighter day, you wanted some yellows in your trees, you could put some yellow down and then your greens over it and allow it to happen wet in wet. I could still go in with yellow now if I wanted to. I will do. I've mentioned it, so I will do. And drop some yellow. Just think about your light source. Drop it to the same side, one side of these little trees, to create a bit of interest, some light and shade. And again, just don't think about it too hard. You're creating an illusion, a scene, sand dunes, hills. I love doing this. I love it. Okay, now what I want to do is bring a stronger colour of sand. So I'm going to glaze. So we're using all the techniques that I took you through earlier. I'm just going to take some more yellow ochre, exactly the same colour, and I'm going to take a band. I don't want to touch the trees. If I go too high and touch the trees, they'll bleed. I'm just going to take a stronger yellow ochre over my sand, wet onto dry again. I'm going to do that again in the foreground. What you can do is let the brush skip over the paper. If you just almost dry brush it and scrape your brush on its side, you create some texture. So now we've got stronger colour coming into our sand. And for interest, I want a bit of a shadow. Something is out of shot over here that's casting a shadow on the sand. And I want a grey. I'm going to use the yellow ochre again, but I want it grey. We don't use black and we don't use white. So to mix a grey, there are all different ways of mixing grey, but the one I find most successful is taking some blue, putting it in your pan, and some dark brown. Mix those together. Now, let me get a piece of paper here and show you. It's getting the mix right, so that's quite grey there. If you go too heavy on the brown, it will change and go more brown. So it's just playing around with those combinations of blue and brown until you get the shade that you want. Okay. You can mix a whole sheet of colours just using blue and brown and getting the most amazing greys come through. We do not need black and white. And now I've got my grey. I'm going to water it down a bit. Just remember, dark to light. If you want it light, put a bit more water. And I'm also going to put a bit of yellow ochre in. Be careful with your yellow ochre because it could go green because there's blue in there. And I'm going to take a shadow area, wet onto dry, just being cast here on the sand. I actually want it a bit darker than that. Just some cast shadows. You could put some shadows. The trees are dry now. If you wanted the sunlight to be coming from behind, like the sun setting, and you wanted a shadow under your trees, just mixing a bit of a darker colour up, bring some shadow coming from the trees. I don't particularly want that in my painting, but yeah, that's not what I was going for today, but just to show you. Okay, I'm just going to soften that back in. So we're getting a nice textured look now. You're getting these shadows coming across the sand, some different colours. Now, my tree's dry. I'm going to give them one more blast. And make sure okay. Now that same colour I've mixed up, the trick is here, we're going to be putting the mountains, the hills in the background, okay? And I really do not want those trees to blur into it. I want them to stay sharp against that hillside. So I'm going to take my grey that I used just here, dark blue and brown. Blue, I'm going to make a bit more. Blue, brown, a bit more brown, a bit more. And a little bit of yellow ochre. Okay, I don't want it too dark. These are distant hills. They're not going to be sharp. Things that are in the distance should be quite muted. And I'm just going to bring my hill behind this tree line and over the top of the trees. I'm really not worried about these trees going over the top. Right down into that gap there. Nice smoky, misty, distant hills. Look at that, over the top of the trees. Not a care in the world. Not having to cut round anything. Trying to figure out how to get your trees in front of the mountains. If you put your mountains in, your green would struggle to show up. So this way, look at that. Distant mountains over the top of your trees. It's not affected your trees other than to darken them slightly. And when that hill dries, you're going to get a nice crisp edge because we've gone wet onto dry. Now, one last thing before I sign off for today. I don't want to overburden you with information. But if you wanted again to show the effect of sunlight hitting the hill, that pulling out technique that I showed you earlier, this is one of the ways you can use it to show the effect of the sunshine. So I'm going to imagine the sunshine's coming from the left because I've got a shadow here. So I'm going to take my brush, dry brush, and just pull the paint out that side of the hill. Just like the sun is hitting that side of the hill, and pull a highlight. So pulling and lifting, lifting colour out is not just for fixing mistakes. It's for creating the effect, the illusion of sun hitting the side of those hills. I have another little bit here. There we go. One finished painting. Now, if you wanted to, you could carry on with this. You could put something in the foreground. You could go in with some grasses that are close to you. Just see how you get on with it to this stage. So I'm going to mix up a bit of yellow ochre and green to give it the sort of sand duney rushes. And you could bring some foreground, some interesting details close to the camera, closer to your viewpoint, should I say. Just drag some grasses. Just taper your brush off, have some fun with it. Just drag this foreground bushes and shrubs and shrubland coming into those corners, a bit more green. Just to give a bit more interest to your painting. Yeah, you can make them darker, stronger, totally up to you. Have some fun with it. have a go. Please have a go. If you need any materials, remember I have a really good deal on the watercolour paper at the moment. £6.50 for a set of 12 sheets. I know some of you have ordered already, and I do have some wonderful sets of watercolours and a few sets of brushes left. So yeah, check out my website. Have a go at this, guys. Remember those techniques, just a few today. The flat wash, the graduated wash, wet in wet, wet in wet, putting a line through, watching it fade out, or strong, and some glazing. I also showed you how to lift out, using your brush, using tissue, using a cotton bud. Okay, so go away, have some fun this afternoon with your paints. Please send me your results. I really love seeing them. And oh, your paper came today. Excellent, Joy. Good to hear it. Have a lovely, lovely afternoon. I'm just going to pop my head round, see if I can take my camera off to speak to you all. Excuse my wall of art. There we are. So thank you so much for painting along. I hope that was useful, and I'll have some more techniques for you tomorrow. Have a lovely afternoon. Love you all. Bye for now. Bye.